So we have a nice small group, and so I'll introduce myself, we'll go through the goals, and then we'll get right into the presentation. Since we have such a nice small group, hopefully we can have more discussion so that people that have questions and concerns are able to voice those, because those are things that probably everybody is a little bit interested in. So anyway, I know some of you from before, but my name's Karen Riley. I'm from the University of Denver. Right now I'm the interim dean, as well as my faculty appointment is in Child Family School Psych, and I have a joint appointment with the Curriculum and Instruction group as well. So my background is really around early childhood special ed, but really focusing in on children with neurodevelopmental disorders, etc. So today, what I was asked to talk about was, is this great? Is there any way that light could just like not, does it have to be right? Okay. So I may put on my shades, but all right, so I'll stand here. Is that okay? All right. So there are a couple things that we're going to talk about today. What I was asked to talk about was kind of the different ways that you can get services for your child. So we're going to talk about 504s, we're going to talk about IEPs, we're going to talk about multi-tier approach, or RTI, and then how are we good advocates about that? How do we get those needs that our children have met within the school system? And then there's going to be some, I think we really needed to, this was something that I was asked to hit on, and we'll talk about it throughout the process, is kind of the pros and cons of special education. So there are people that, kind of have some negative feelings about special ed, and then there are people that are like, well, I don't understand why you would feel bad about special ed. So we're going to talk about both sides of that so that we address kind of the concerns and understand why people get worried about it, and then what we can and can't do about it. All right? Seem fair?
You will not be talking just in the context of Colorado.
No, we're going to talk a little bit about Colorado, but we're going to talk about federal law.
Okay, good.
I've got the websites on here from Colorado and the .gov for the country, and the laws that we're going to talk about generally are federal laws. Okay, well then we won't have too much to discuss in that particular section. It's just really more basic websites and where to go for information. I didn't think that for us today that going over the law step by step was very helpful, and so we'll spend a little bit more time on these other kinds of nuanced issues. Okay, so let's start. Before we even start talking about what. Okay, so the what would be IEPs and 504s and RTI and all that kind of thing. The first thing we have to do is to really understand why. Okay, so just for 2 minutes, okay, why do we have special education? What's the purpose of any of or IDEA? Or a 504 plan, or RTI, or any of that kind of thing? Why do we even have it? Okay, so what about intervention? Okay, so give them the help that they need. What else? You're on the right track. Can you take it one more?
For me, it would be to secure the future for later on in life.
Okay, secure the future for later on in life. Yep.
To ensure that there is a plan on how the school staff will implement interventions and strategies to help the student improve academic achievement.
Okay. Okay. Fair. Okay. Right. So not all kids learn the same way. Absolutely. So that would kind of go to that individual part of the special ed part, right? What else?
Well, part of my problem is what I understand is that special education is to provide an environment where all children have equal access to academic environment. So as as we transition from CDS into the school system, all of the services are now focused around making the academic environment accessible to my daughter. Not necessarily what are her special needs, but what does she need to access the academic environment and the curriculum within the academic environment.
Okay,
At least in the state of Maine.
okay. That's kind of an interesting kind of spin on that. We can talk about that in a minute, but yeah.
To try and bring your child up to grade level, that's a piece of it.
There is a piece of it. There is a piece of it. So all of these things are, there's a piece of truth in everything that you're bringing up. Okay? So when we think about special education, we could look at these two pictures and say, which one of these kids has special needs? Okay? If you looked at one, if you looked at this little baby, you would say, does he have special needs? Yeah, of course, right? This little guy has Down syndrome. What about this guy over here? Does he have special needs? We don't know, right? We don't know. Which one will suffer the most without support? Do we know? Which one?
You don't know.
We don't know. The research is interesting about this, that when we look at kids that have really obvious kinds of special needs, okay? What we do know is that kids that things are clearly clear to other people in a physical sense, that people say, oh, I get it, okay? This guy has a special need, right? He has Down syndrome, we kind of understand what that is, and we certainly are going to make sure that this guy gets his special needs met, right? And is there any disputing this? Could we go into the teacher and say, I don't know what you're talking about. This guy, there's no extra chromosome here. Could we do that? Not really, right? Because everybody would know, absolutely, this guy has Down syndrome, okay? This guy actually probably is at a little bit more risk, okay? What we know is that kids that look, okay, typical, kids that have learning disabilities, these are what we call hidden disabilities, okay? I look fine, I look like everybody else out here, but things don't work right for me, right? So I have trouble paying attention, I have trouble learning, I have trouble focusing, I have more anxiety, I have whatever, right? And so at the beginning, because we don't look immediately here and say, oh, okay, I recognize that you have special needs. We're going to give you that intervention right away, and we expect that you're going to have some things that you're going to need, and we're going to take care of that. This one, for a while, we sometimes say, well, he's naughty, he's lazy, he can't focus, he's just a boy, all of those kinds of things. We know, okay, that when we have individuals who look fine and don't get the support that they need, all right, especially individuals that are a little bit higher functioning cognitively, are at more of a risk for things like later substance abuse, depression, anxiety, suicide, all of those kinds of things. Okay? Because, and it's important that we understand this as we go on, is that when you start, okay, with the child, an individual who is a little bit higher functioning, okay, they are aware of the fact, okay, that things aren't working for them the way they are for everybody else in their classroom. So I did my homework, right? It took me, God only knows how long to get it done, right? And it was a big argument at home, and I put it in the backpack, and I got to school and I didn't turn it in. And when I got back home, I got in trouble because I didn't turn it in, and I just must be stupid. I must be bad, right? So in the absence of understanding why, and in the absence of all of this clear support for that, all kids do this, all people do this, right? In the absence of clear information about why this stuff is happening, okay, we make up our own stuff, right? So let's go to something that's a little bit different. So when parents get a divorce, we all understand this. When parents get a divorce, oftentimes kids will say, well, it must have been because I, didn't put my shoes away. It caused all the fighting, and if I had just put my shoes away, things would have been a lot better, right? Or I did a support group here one time in this particular, with this particular group, some siblings, and we played a game that was called, it was a true or false game. And one of the kids, it was a young group, and so one of the statements said, my brother has XXYY because he ate a bug when he was little, okay? And the guy that read it, a little kid, and he read it, and he laughed. He was like, that's not why. And so I said, well, why then? And he said, because he fell off his bike and he wasn't wearing a helmet. And so, still, that if we don't really understand what's going on, we make stuff up, right? Because we need to understand, we need to have a reason for this. All right, so when we look at why we're doing this, we know that children that struggle academically and socially become more anxious, depressed, demoralized, okay? And that is the link towards substance abuse, dropping out of school, all of those kinds of things, all right? So it's really important that we think about this. The other thing is, okay, the reason that we have IEPs, okay, and you are all kind of thinking about this, is that it makes a difference. Okay? Do any of you know what Huntington's chorea is, or Huntington's disease is? Anybody have an idea? Okay. In the back, what is it?
Sorry, eating lunch dinner, degenerative.
Okay. Okay. So motor impairments and... Okay. So is there a cure for that?
She plays
Yeah. Is there a cure for it?
No, it's inherited.
It's inherited. There's no cure for it.
You can see if you're genetically programmed.
Right. Right. You can. Do you know why we don't screen for that? So we screen for cervical cancer, right? We screen for breast cancer. We screen for colon cancer. We screen for lots of things. You know why we don't screen for that?
Because it's a death sentence.
Doesn't make any difference. Okay? It does not make one bit of difference. When we think about strategies that we have in place, the reason why we have special education, okay, is that it makes a difference. Okay? We can change the trajectory of the kids that we're working with, right? So back to what you were saying, which was because we want to plan for the future, okay, is that part of why we have the services that we have is that we can change that trajectory. We know that early intervention works, okay? And in the slides, in the references, there are more references than this. But we know that appropriate intervention works. So when we look at, if you find the match, right, if you find the appropriate reading intervention or math intervention or whatever, that you can make a difference for kids, right? You can, it doesn't say that they're going to completely be reading at grade level, okay? But we know that we can change that trajectory. Without intervention, we also know that things get worse. Okay, that's that spiral. That's that thing. I feel bad. I recognize that I'm not able to do this. Okay, and so then I get depressed, and then I get anxious, and then maybe I get involved with substance abuse, or I don't go to school, or whatever it is, and things get worse. Okay, and ignoring things doesn't work either. Okay, so when we look at, here's a little bit of information, and I didn't want to go too crazy on the stats, but this is the kind of when things aren't so obvious. Okay, we look at things from the outside and we think, well, maybe we could just do something, or maybe if we just ignore this, things will go away. Okay, what we know from statistics is that doesn't work either. Okay, so the reason that I went through all of this is that the law has some rationale behind it, okay? The reason that it's important is not just for the moral reason of we want to create an environment where somebody can learn. It's that it actually does work, okay? Does that make sense? Okay. Everybody following me, kind of? Remember, I'm a teacher, so I'm going to need some little feedback of head shaking or something. All right. So rather than having a big, again, discussion of the law, what I thought we should do, I would just put these two websites up here. Okay, so for those of you that are from Colorado, when you click on this website, and there's a tab that's special education law and rules. They have a section for parents around advocacy and a very clearly defined kind of frequently asked questions. How do you get your, what to do in an IEP, all of those kinds of things. This website, this .gov website, actually when you go into the, if you just put in Department of Education, Special Education Law, this is kind of what comes up. And there's there's a tab there that looks at parents' rights and a guide to accessing services and how to really work with the school district. There's some things in there that are actually, I think, pretty helpful around when you can ask your child to be moved to another school and all of those kinds of things. So these are some good resources for you. I refer these to, parents to these a lot because I think that they've done a much better job recently of trying to make sure that that the laws that are posted, particularly on the .gov side, are much more family friendly. Okay, yes?
We lived in 2 states, and each state that we lived in has a similar thing to your Colorado, where you go and you just type in, like, for Maine, Maine now. You type in Maine, special education law, parents, and there is preparing for your IEP, and it's very clear-cut. Suggestions for preparing for IEP. It also suggests that you call the Department of Education and get a copy of the special education law and have it and review it and know it. And we lived in Rhode Island before that, and they had the same thing too, so I'm assuming each state probably has a similar thing. And I just Googled it, and it was, they even have a parent advocacy group within the state of Maine where you can call people up and say, hey, what has been your experience? What can I expect? What can I not expect? Within the context of your state law, because each state is so different. So
yeah, I think it's pretty, I think it's much better than it used to be as far as, and I would encourage you to use those websites because I think the feedback that both states and federal agencies have received from parents and advocacy groups have been, you know what, this needs to be user-friendly. We don't understand what this says, so what the age. But I do think that one of the things to remember, and it's a great point that you bring up, depending on your state, you may have a state that has universal policies and procedures. That's much more likely to occur on the East Coast and in the South. Okay? In the West, typically we have more local control. And so there are state guidelines, and then there are policies and procedures that are district driven. So the districts, when we say local control, what that means is that the this individual district and sometimes even the individual school, okay, have the control of how they're going to interpret and sometimes operationalize the law, okay? So I think that that's a great thing, especially for those of you that are, and you would know if you lived in a state that was local control. Colorado was a local control state. New Mexico is a local control state. Texas is not a local control state. Texas has statewide things. Wyoming, local control. Montana, local control. Okay, so the further out west you get, oftentimes, the more there's variation within the districts. Part of that is kind of that Western culture, like we do what we want. But part of it is that things that are appropriate for the school district in DPS may not be a good match for people that live in Haxton, Colorado, which is a very rural town. So, yes? Just stretching? Okay, well, since I'm used to big auditoriums of students, it's kind of like an auctioneer, so if you scratch your head, I'm going to think that you maybe, or make a sudden movement, I have to interpret all of the moves.
That or baseball thing.
Yeah, all part of the skill set for being a professor. Yes?
So I noticed that just within school district, here in town, the disparity of treatment between schools.
Right.
You got to remember, metropolitan Denver's got 41 cities.
No,
Right.
that's fine, but I'm talking within the same school district.
Right, so that's what I was saying about in Colorado in particular, we have local control at the building level.
At the building level.
So, and sometimes that can be a good thing. Oftentimes that's a frustrating thing. But sometimes that can be a good thing because we also have rules within the state that allow you to open and enroll across schools. Yes?
Despite, just a question, I mean, despite the ability that they have to determine how they're going to implement
Yes.
the law, they still have to follow
Yep.
the law. So knowing the law is obviously important because, especially if you have the ability to have that local power of implementing it differently, because then you as a parent can ensure that they're going to follow the law for your child.
Knowledge is power. I mean, knowledge is always power. So you are at the difference between how I feel going into get my car fixed and how I feel going and advocating for my son at the University of Colorado. I understand exactly what I'm walking into as a faculty member or a dean at the University of Colorado. I have no idea what I'm doing when I go into the car place, and I'm kind of at their mercy, and I just kind of go like, okay, here's my wallet and here is my car. And so with something as important as our children's future, we really need to be understanding what that law is. Okay? You're right. All right. So let's talk these next slides are just some definitional things. These are federal, okay, so that we're all operating under the same understanding. Okay, so related services, so it's part of the special education. Now these are things like OT, paras, speech, all of that kind of thing. All right, they are typically outside of education, but this is the key right here. All designed to meet the learning needs, okay, of individual children with disabilities. The key here is learning needs, okay? So when you go, and we're going to go through this step by step on these how-to kinds of things. When you go into an IEP or any kind of a meeting, okay? What happens and what causes the most friction typically is that parents, and sometimes me as an advocate when I used to do that kind of work, okay, people will say to me, I want you to come with me because he needs more OT, okay? He needs more OT services, okay? 1 time a week is not enough, okay? He needs 2 times a week, right? Okay. That may be the case. Oftentimes the parents are absolutely right. He needs more speech or he needs more OT. He absolutely needs a para, okay? Going in there and saying he needs a para, he needs more speech is not going to get you more speech or more OT. That's not the law, okay? That is not the law, right? What you do need to go in and say are, what are his needs right now, okay? Not, these are the services, these are not the needs, okay? So in order to say, I think he needs more OT, What we really need to do is go in and make a case for what's going on with him motorically that interferes with learning, okay? And make a case for what he's got right now isn't doing it, okay? So how are we going to do that, right? Does that make sense? If you go in and say, he needs more OT, they even, and I want to make sure that I'm clear about this. I had this at the end, but I really debated whether I should put it at the front or at the end. When you go into the IEP or the RTI meeting or whatever it is, this should be a collaborative relationship, okay? This should, pardon me?
Spoonful of sugar.
Well, it's better for us to all try to work together, right? And I'm not saying that you need to bake cookies or anything like that to do it, but I do think what sometimes happens, and I think somebody had just shared this with me before the meeting, is that sometimes we get advice from people that says, you better be ready to fight, okay? Get in on that IEP and you had better be ready to fight, okay? Being ready to fight is probably not the best mentality of going into your IEP meeting. You are going to, and let me be clear on this too. It's not the best if you hire an advocate. That's not the best mentality for your advocate either, okay? Especially, and when people would hire me to go in, and usually it was when things were absolutely horrible, okay? So it's one step away from a lawsuit, or they're already in a lawsuit before I would come in. And they would say, oh, I'm so glad you're here because I know that you're going to rip them apart. They won't know what hit them. They're just going to, they're going to, rue the day that they met you. Okay, that, I could do that. It probably, would be a little bit satisfying for a few minutes, right? But my job as an advocate is to make things better, okay? I'm going to leave. The advocate's going to leave. I'm going to go back to the college. The parent and the kid have to stay there, and if they're not moving, that's the environment that they're going to be in. My job is to make it better. So think about that when you hire an advocate. You want someone who knows the law. You want someone who is very, very clear about that. But you do not want someone who's just going to come in and tear things apart and then leave and you're there to deal with the mess. It's not a very good idea. I'm just telling you. Okay? Yes? Do you have your hand up? Okay. Seriously. I mean, any kind of movement. Yeah.
So part of, I think, your point you're making is we were sitting through the IEP meeting with my son, and I says, well, what about OT? And the occupational therapist sitting there says, there's nothing that I can provide for your son because what I can provide for him is not interfering with his need for learning.
Okay.
His ability to tie a shoe is not necessarily interfering with his ability to learn. I said, okay, thank you. And I said, okay, well, what about this and this and this? Is we put down the minimums on the IEP. So this is just the bare minimums, and we don't want to be restricted, because if we write it down, then that means every time that this has to happen in the classroom, and it may be too restrictive.
Well, that is a...
So that was part of the quotes that I got from them.
Right. So they are, oftentimes the people that are in your, that person is not entirely wrong, okay? And legally, right. However, what you want to get to is not, and their job, let's be clear, their job is not to provide the gold standard. Right. Unfortunately. Right. That's unfortunate, but the case needs to be made if it really is. So the shoe tying thing, okay, one of the things that you can do, and we were talking about this before class started, before this started, it's hard for me to shift, that one of the things that we do want, and we can ask for, are independent skills, or ADLs, so skills for daily living, okay? And so when we look there, okay, this interferes with his what? Okay, does this interfere with his ability to move from PE to not PE? Does it interfere with his social acceptance? Those kinds of things, because that actually is part of this. Okay? So if he can't get reasonable benefit out of PE because he can't, or because he can't get his shoes tied and he can't transition back and forth, then that is a learning need. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes.
And so focusing in on, I'm really concerned about it because this interferes with his ability to gain reasonable benefit from this educational system, because these are the things that are stumbling blocks for him. Okay? Now, the other thing when we talk about independence is that once your child hits 14, okay, then you even have more power within the law, because we're looking at transition plans around independence for vocational. Okay, so once we hit that, the kid is 14, some states they do 16, is that now we're starting to look at transitional services. What are we going to do for the child once they've graduated? That shift, okay, in perspective allows, we're still talking about this, but we have a little bit more power behind us, because we're actually looking for how are you going to
Take care of yourself.
take care of yourself and live independently. Okay? Yes?
How do you know a lot of our kids have, my daughter transitioned from inclusive preschool and she's going into kindergarten, and when we met with the transition team, 70% of her IEP now is involved around social skills.
Mm-hmm.
We moved into kindergarten and they don't have time or space to deal with social skill issues. How do I convince them that her social skill issues, her social delays, her immaturity, all that social stuff is going to hamper her ability to access her learning environment? How do I convince them that those need to be in her IEP? They don't have the time or the resources to deal with social skill issues.
Okay, so it's not okay to say, I don't have the time or the resources to deal with that. So that's against the law.
Right, that's what they said. Oh, I don't know where I recorded it.
Okay? So those are things that's a misstep on their part. Okay? Because that's against the law. Now you can't say, you know what, I see that she needs this, but we don't have time to do it. Pardon me?
I think that means they don't know how to.
Oftentimes, and that's a great point. So our initial thing when we hear that is, I don't want to, but usually it's, I'm afraid that I don't know how to. Okay? And so what the case needs to be made of, how does those things that take away the social skill part of it, even take away that umbrella of social relatedness, okay? And say, what are the things that interfere with her ability to learn? So part of being able to learn in a kindergarten setting is that you're going to have to interact in small group activities. With peers. Yeah. Well, they shouldn't. They shouldn't be. So let me say one quick thing about that too. The shift from there are two big shifts. Okay, maybe three. But for individuals that have IEPs, probably one of the scariest and the most dramatic is the shift from early intervention, where it's people are like me. They're warm and nice and they love babies. They want to work with you. They love you. Everything is happy. And then it's like, and then the school system. And part of it is a natural transition. Every parent who has a child that doesn't have special needs moves from preschool, where everybody is all about families and everything goes smoothly, and then into the cool reality. I don't know. So part of that's a little bit normal, of feeling a little anxious about that shift, but making sure, okay, so back to answering your question. First of all, it's against the law. The second thing is that what you really want to say is, what are her needs, okay? And focus on those, and how are they going to be met?
So for all of us that have the social skill part, how we know it impacts learning. We know We know that if she can't interact with her peers, if she can't sit in the classroom with her peers, the learning gets shut down. So how do we word that need, like you said before, to focus on how does it interfere with her learning? How do we translate that? How do I translate into that her not being able to interact one-on-one with a small group of peers impacts her learning? How do I word that? How do we get that?
Okay, so part of what you're going to do, and we're going to talk about this when we get to RTI a little bit more, is that you're going to ask for something around database decision making. Okay, so what you can say is, I'd like to, I want to understand how this classroom works. Okay, so can you tell me, how often do we have group instruction? How often do we have individual group, individual instruction? How much of this time is small group instruction? Okay, so first you want to set the stage of, please tell me how this instruction is going to be occurring during the day, right? Then what we want to say is, my concern is that, we have documentation here that she can only sit for this long, okay? That communicating, if social is the weird thing that they can't get into, talk about communication. That's there. She can't communicate with her peers, so can she ask a question? Can she follow direction? Can she share? Can she wait her turn? Pragmatics of language, okay? Which have social impact. Shift, again, like I said, stop fighting about social interaction. Move to communication, all right? So if she can't do that, what I'd like for you to do is, okay, let's give it a try. And then in 6 weeks, I expect to see how often was she able to do this, okay? How often was she able to be with her peers, okay? Have it come back. If we're not doing this, I'd like to have, how are we going to meet that need? That's your right. Do you see what I'm saying?
Away from using that clue of social skills, which they obviously have to do against, to use communication.
Right? And behavior.
The classroom.
The,
How can she function within the classroom? Like, this is what the classroom is doing, and how is she functioning?
Because being able to function in the classroom is a learning need, because that's where instruction takes place. Okay? The other thing to do is to try to get your person, whomever they are, to engage with you around time-saving activities. Okay? Because teachers, back to the comment over here of them being afraid, is that oftentimes what happens is that the teacher, you want to talk about it as far as a scale goes, right? So you can either pay now or pay later. So if she, and this is back to data, how much time is the teacher spending trying to come and sit down, come back to your group, hey, look at her, now you have to, okay? If you say to the teacher, hey, let's be proactive about this, how much time are you actually spending on this? Then that gets the teacher engaged and says, you're absolutely right. I need some help in here. I need this in order for there to be reasonable benefit from the educational environment. Make sense?
Because the other children are suffering.
Well, if the teacher spends all of her time on whatever it is,
The IEP needed children.
well, by not having the needs of the IEP, of the kids that have IEPs in their classroom being appropriate, okay, then they're much more willing to say, we all need help. Okay, so this is what needs to happen. School psychologist, speech language therapist, OT, I need some help, right? So there was a little boy that I worked with, again, about ready to get kicked out of school, for the final time. He was a third grader, and so I went to a school, and this is a guy that had lots and lots of needs, but he was in a fully included classroom. He was with his paraprofessional the whole time, and so I went to observe him. All right, and I was in the classroom for 3.5 hours wearing my "I'm here to observe" Christian T-shirt. It wasn't like I wasn't like they didn't know why I was there. They knew exactly why I was there and who I was there for. 3.5 hours, the regular ed teacher didn't talk to that kid once. Not his name, not anything. Okay? So when we went into the IEP, I said, it was 3.5 hours, and you didn't talk to him once. Not his name, not anything. And that teacher, very sweet, very nice, started to cry. Okay? And she's, oh my gosh. I said, you are not the one who should be crying. Okay? OT, speech therapist, LD, teacher, school psychologist, you are the ones who should be crying. Okay? It's your job to support her so that she knows what she's doing in the classroom. And the person who was doing the most with this very, very, very complicated guy was the paraprofessional who had a high school degree. Okay? So when we talk about that, we want to get that teacher on our side. Okay? And we want her to say to those other people, I need your help. Show me how I can do this in my room. Because oftentimes the teacher is afraid to say it. When I was teaching, I had the opening for all of the teachers at DU, and I said, okay, welcome, all that. How many of you are going to work in elementary? They all sit together. It's like a big divide. It's like Democrats and Republicans. They're like, yeah, I'm over here. We're elementary. We don't like the high school people.
Yeah, those kids are rude.
Yeah, they like us still. Then I said, how many of you are going to work with high school kids? This group was over here. I said, oh, great. How many of you feel like you're going to work with kids with special needs? Two people. And one of them was my own kid. So she doesn't even count, right? So one reasonable person, one normal person in the thing. And I said, all of you will have kids with special needs in your classroom. Okay? And so what happens is, it's really a very powerful statement. It's not that they didn't want to. They just didn't think they were going to, right? They're going into teaching not thinking that that was going to be part of their responsibility. So that is our responsibility, but we need to help those people be successful. All right, let's keep going. The 504 plan, really quickly, this is This is to ensure that children with disabilities have access to public education. Students with 504 plans do not meet the eligibility requirements for special education under IDEA. Okay? So what this is, okay, 504 plan oftentimes is for somebody, it was designed, let's be clear about what it is and what it's not. Okay, this is why we even have this slide up here. It was, look when it was set up. Okay? And it was originally designed to meet if you've got somebody who'd been staffed out of special ed. Okay? I no longer meet those things, but there are a couple things that this kid still is struggling with. Not functioning below the 7th percentile, not 2 grade levels behind or something, but still struggling a little bit. Okay? Some people feel like this is they'd rather have this than a IEP. Okay? In some ways it's good because it gives you that safety net. Oftentimes it'll keep the child from being suspended if you've got behavioral issues. It gives sometimes a mandate for extra time and things like that. The thing that the 504 plan is missing, okay, is when we look at RTI, which is an improvement on this, is that this doesn't require any data collection. Okay? So it's not really designed as an intervention tool, nor is it designed to continually be fluid enough to adjust to the needs of the student. Really what it is we've decided, you know what, this kid is doing pretty okay. We know that really what he needs or she needs is more time or the opportunity to turn things in a little bit late or something like that. But other than that, that's all we're doing. Okay? So the 504 plan sometimes very, very helpful. Sometimes you have to understand that it is not designed to be fluid, it's not reflective, and it oftentimes does not inform practice. Okay? So there's no data, there's nothing in this law that says, oh, okay, and then I'm going to measure how many times this happens, and then we're going to go back to the teacher and say, oh, it's actually not that those turning in those things late is what's making a difference, it's really something else. That doesn't happen with 504. Okay? Clear? Yes?
So my daughter has a private school, and, you know, in there it says she needs to be allowed extra time for assignments or reduced assignments. You know, good seating next to kids who are good role models and stuff. And I don't think they do any of it. There's no way to know, is there a way for me to know, like, exactly what they're doing?
Right, so when these, my recommendation to you is that the 504, you can ask for it to be revisited, just like you can with an IEP, okay? But what it doesn't have within it is who is monitoring this stuff on a regular basis. That's not what it's designed to do, unfortunately. When we look at the RTI thing, I'm going to show you that, and then maybe we can think if that's a better way for your child to go. Does that make sense? All right. You can ask for it to be documented of who's going to do this, but it's really not a part of the, it's not designed to do it. So it kind of, they don't have to do that if they either can't or it's not a function. Okay? So very typical of the 504. That's why I'm kind of critical of the 504. All right. IEP, we all really understand that probably. It's got the learning goals, the needs, current level of functioning, accommodations and modifications, and related services that they need to attend school and maximize their learning. Okay? Again, it doesn't say that it has to be the best that there ever was. And that's unfortunate. Unfortunately, that's the same, actually, you know, for all kids, typical and not, and children with special needs. They don't have to make everything perfect or the best for individual kids. Well, hopefully we're getting to a place where we're doing a better job with that. So I think probably you're most familiar with this. Okay, IFSP, so this is for very young children. So let me go back to this. This is part B of the Individuals with Disabilities Act, okay? And it's for kids, school-aged kids, and goes to 21 for children that need those kinds of services. It's part 619 is the part for preschoolers. So 3 to 5 is part 619 of part B. When we get to younger kids, this is part C. And this is the Individualized Family Service Plan. Again, if you think IEPs vary, then IFSPs really even vary more, depending on where you are. That is the biggest gap. Yeah.
So I thought you couldn't have an IEP in college. Are you saying you can have an IEP and a 504 in college?
It goes, the state's responsibility goes with you if you are still, not in college, but if you're still part of if you haven't transitioned into college and we're looking at a prolonged high school diploma situation, then you still have an IEP and a plan through 21.
So is the 504 then what you would take to college if you had that?
What happens in college is that it depends on the university and where you go. So typically what happens at a university setting is that the school is required to accommodate you, but how that accommodation takes place is very different in varying universities. And so when you look at a large state university, really you're going to get maybe a little bit more time or take your test somewhere else. But it's not, because it's not your right to go to college, if that makes sense, that it's much more of a struggle. And so for those of you that are interested in having your children go to universities, I would really, really recommend that you look at their learning effectiveness programs. That's typically what they're called, learning effectiveness programs. There are several universities across the country that do an excellent job. I'm just going to have to say a little DU plug that DU is ranked second in the country in their learning effectiveness program. It's on the 4th floor of my building, and they have tutoring, they have all of those kinds of things. So but be careful thinking I have a 504, so no matter where I go, they're going to have to honor it. They're going to honor according to the law, but that may be, again, the minimum. It's not going to necessarily ensure that the child's able to be successful. So you're going to want to have someone that, if really it's just test taking and anxiety around that kind of thing and needing extended time, you're probably going to be pretty good no matter where you are. What you do have to do, though, is remember that you're going to have to take standardized tests and that kind of data with you, because if you don't have something that's recent, they'll make you take it all over again, okay, at your own cost. And that's their right. Okay, so, but if the child really needs organizational skills, how to plan, how to study, that kind of thing, you're going to really want to every university look at what is your learning effectiveness program. Okay, if they don't have a program that's specifically called that or outlines that, you don't want anything to do with it. Okay, all right. How are we doing on time? Okay, now we're at RTI. Okay, so response to intervention, now it's really called, so it's part of the reauthorization of IDEA in 2004. It was originally designed so that children don't have to fail before they receive services. Okay, so especially for those of you in the group that have children that have much more of a subtle kind of a learning disability issue, so maybe not our XXYY group, but maybe our XXY or something like that group, XYY, Klinefelter's groups as well. Sometimes this is a better approach for you, because waiting, okay, it's back to that. We used to have a test deficit place model, which meant that we tested you. If you had a big enough deficit, you were placed in special ed. Okay, that was it. So if you're at the 7th percentile and below, you got services. If you're at the 8th percentile, good to go. Okay, so that is not good, right? And so we knew that didn't work, and so they moved to this response to intervention. There are 3 different approaches, really. Problem-solving approach, which means I'm going to look at the kid, see what's going on, and individually address the problem. Oftentimes that's for behavioral or social skills, but we can use that approach academically as well. There's a standard protocol approach, which means if you don't get reasonable benefit from the universal level, that you're going to move directly into a certain thing. So let's say we have local control. I believe in reading recovery. If you're a struggling reader, standard protocol for my school is go to reading recovery. Okay? Regardless of your phenotypic profile or what your strengths and weaknesses are around reading. Okay? And then there's the combined approach. So the hallmarks of this multi-tiered approach, which is what it's called now, they're moving away from RTI. For some reason that was offensive. Who knows, education. I think really what happens is everybody learned it and then we decided to change it, because that's what we do. So it's a tiered approach. There's an increase of intensity of intervention as one moves up the tiers, and I'm going to show you those in just a second. It really has a problem-solving approach to it. Let's figure out what's going on. There's progress monitoring that's mandated as a part of it. Okay, so this is back to why would I want a 504 or why would I want to do this? Progress monitoring is the key. Data is the key. So back to knowledge is power. Data is real power. Okay? If I can have research on evidence-based intervention and I have data to show that my kid either is responding or not responding, this is your best friend. Okay? Okay, here's the data. Now what are you going to do? What?
That's the knowledge.
Pardon me? That's the knowledge. Absolutely. Absolutely. It's very collaborative. So again, back to that group where I was saying, you all should be the ones that are crying. It's not one person's responsibility. It's the whole team's responsibility. I know we have that in IEPs. okay? But this even holds people a little bit more accountable because the data-based approach to the problem solving occurs more rapidly. So this is Cherry Creek Schools tiered approach. So the universal is what's good, what's universally acceptable to everyone. If you don't do well here, then we don't put you all the way over here into an IEP. We say, okay, you're not making progress the way we thought that you should. We're not going to wait until you fail, but you need to move up here and get a little bit more help. Okay, it may be a standard protocol, like we said, a specific approach, or it may be something that we just need for you. If that doesn't work, then we're going to go up here and look at something that's more intensive, maybe pulled out of the classroom or something like that. Some places have, this is the IEP. Some people have the IEP over here in no man's land, okay? Now let's think about that. Here are other variations along that same theme, okay? So early childhood has one as well that's called recognition and response. Here are the, and you can, I don't expect you to read all these. This is RTI principles over here, and there's corresponding early childhood principles. Early childhood was not very quick to jump on this because they were like, oh really, looking at the kid individually and taking data and then doing what the child needed? Yeah, we called that early childhood a long time ago. So they were not so excited about jumping on board because they felt like they'd been doing it forever. This is kind of their approach to it. Some states and some school districts are using it. A lot of them are just using their old thing. So, or they're doing it without calling it recognition and response. So the benefits are that it's individualized, they're not required to fail, they don't have to qualify for an IEP before they receive support. That's important. Okay? That's the key, and that's the best thing about a multi-tiered approach. Okay? You don't have to fail. Now, the other thing is that progress monitoring advances what we know about interventions for individuals with like X and Y variation. Let me show you how that works. So, what we haven't done well with your groups or with kids with Down syndrome or Fragile X, we've done pretty good with kids with autism, is that we don't have something that we say, oh my gosh, this reading approach has a perfect match for the phenotypic profile of these guys. If we can use this kind of a reading approach and try it out, then we're in good shape. Use this. Use a phonetic approach. Use the Mimeo approach or Reading Plus or whatever it is. So we start with inclusion and RTI. Then we add on to it understanding the disorder. What is, because these are genetic disorders, right? We know that they're different at a cellular level. Okay? It's not just well they learn differently, they look a little. Every cell moves a little bit differently. That's huge, right? And the more that we know about that, the better that we're able to do this next thing, which is, okay, I'm going to do RTI, the targeted treatment I'm going to try. I've got a kid with XXYY. I'm going to try reading recovery and see if it works. Okay? If it works or it doesn't work, I've got data, okay, in the form of the progress monitoring that I could use it as a case study. My teacher could, and university could, whatever, which would inform larger studies, which then creates an evidence-based pool, okay, where you then can go in, like the parents of the kids that have autism, and say, what do you mean no ABA? Those parents go in and say, here's the documentation that shows that ABA works with my kid. So you're going to tell me we're not having 40 hours? I don't think so. I think we are. And the school district does it. You go in there and go like this, I got nothing. I don't know the best reading approach, but can we try some things, right? The more that you push this, okay, and ask them to understand and keep track of this, the better you are armed to go in there and say, this is the evidence-based approach that works with my kid, and I want you to try that. Make sense? Getting a little excited about this because I think it's so exciting. Okay, so this is just a regular, what an IEP does, this is what a tiered approach does, which is the IEP really doesn't have phenotypic consideration in there, okay? It's individualized. Well, what does he do and what does he not do? As I was talking to someone before the session, is that the third grade person, the person that's teaching third grade that sets forth the IEP for this particular individual says, in third grade, this is what we need. Okay? They don't understand the developmental trajectory that we know occurs in the kids that we have. Okay? So they're not thinking about all those things. We need to think about those things, and this approach works that way. Something that we need to think about as we're moving forward is that inclusion is not geography. Okay? So this guy, is he included? He's happy. So sweet. Okay? But here's the group, and here's him. Okay? This is not inclusion. This is geography. Okay? The only way to have true inclusion is for the children to be functional in their classrooms. Okay, so last couple things. How do we know how to become a good advocate? Know your legal rights. Okay? The IEP does not have to be done at the end of one meeting. Okay? Sometimes we feel like, I need to hurry, go ahead, we only have 5 minutes left, let's just get it done. It doesn't have to be done that way. Wait until you make sure that it's right. Take an advocate. The advocate, again, should not be somebody that wants to fight, but this person should be your second set of ears. Okay? Because when you're in there, it's emotional. Okay? You're only hearing part of it. No one could hear all of it. Right? They may say something that is startling to you. You're not going to hear anything else after that. Okay? You need someone else to help you with that, to be that second memory. Okay? It's like a backup system on your computer. Build bridges with the school personnel, not fortresses to protect against them. Okay? You are going to be there for a long time. Right? Sometimes you can't avoid fighting. Sometimes you end up with people that are just ridiculous. But try to go into it with that. Let's try to get, because really the goal is, okay, to get your child the best education that's possible. All right? Coordination of care. When we think about all of the therapists, et cetera, that are involved with your child, it's optimal if you can have these guys attend the meetings with school. That way it isn't filtered through you. It comes straight from their mouths, right? This is what this person needs. That's what this person needs. Make sure you sign releases to allow communication between professionals. Again, for them, the more that they know, the better they're going to feel as well. Okay? The IE process is a collaboration. Be open to new ideas about what your child can work on. Okay? Just like with that reframing. Try not to have a specific rigid plan. So that's what I was saying about not going in there and saying, I need 30 more minutes of speech. Let's talk about what does the child actually need, okay, and how can we go about getting it. And then try to, again, to avoid that all or nothing position or attitude. I know sometimes that's hard, but really trying to think, how can we give this a good shot and make sure that it works for everyone involved. Before you go in, really making sure that you're understanding what your child's strengths are, challenges, their interests, what bothers the child. I think these will be on a thing. You don't have to write all this stuff down. I'll make sure that these are available to you. These are things that help inform both the data and the types of intervention that you might be using. I think this is important to share, okay? And sometimes that you have to talk that through with someone else. So what seems like you're fighting about may not actually be what your biggest concern is. Letting people know what your biggest concern is. I'm afraid that he's not going to be able to be successful in high school. I'm afraid that he's not going to be able to live alone. I'm afraid he's not going to be able to walk, whatever it is, okay? Making sure that you can articulate that, and it's as much for you going in there as it is for the person that's trying to work with you. All right? This is another thing to think about before you go in there. What are you worried will happen during this meeting? Okay, what's your biggest worry? Sometimes you just have to talk this out. What am I afraid of before I go in there? That they're not going to listen? Is that it? Or is it really that you're going to feel dismissed or it's going to be painful? I don't know. You need to think about that yourself. What do you hope will happen? Okay? Do you feel supported or intimidated by the process? And are there some team members who you feel like is your ally? Who's the person in that meeting who you feel like, God, she's always on the same page with me? How am I going to engage that person to help me through this process? Are there team members who evoke negative feelings? If so, what are you going to do about that? Yeah.
Little part from this, something that always bothered me, a kid is supposed to get speech therapy because we did together for a couple of weeks, and when asked, the school says that person that a fire needed to be used to monitor state testing. I'm thinking that's not legal.
Right. So I think what you can do is you can keep data on that. They are not supposed to pull service. If the person is sick, or missed it, that's a different thing. But this, she's on maternity leave and so he's got nothing, is absolutely unacceptable as well.
Well, I figured I didn't have anything to stand on because in September, New York, they observe a lot of the holidays and speech therapists was out most of September, so once in October, and I knew I didn't have anything to stand on if it was something to do with observer.
Well,
but what about the person being in the building but being pulled to monitor for a city test?
Right. So, I think that that all of those things actually have, you have some grounds to go back on. So it's not that person, you don't have grounds because you're,
They have their rights.
They have their rights and you're not a racist or something, but you're going to say, yeah, you know what, I get that person needs to observe there. So next September, we know that there are going to be all these holidays. What's the plan? Because we can't afford a month that's off. So how are we going to make sure that his services are either covered by someone else, or what's the plan here? You can ask, what's the plan? Okay, that already happened, I get it. Okay, maybe we couldn't have guessed. Seems like we might have been able to, but we couldn't. But now we know. What's the plan for next year? That's fair. Okay, you can demand that.
And as far as you're concerned, to her question, it is her legal right to make sure that these services are being provided.
It's in the document. It's a legally binding document. Yes.
Speech therapist cannot go monitor a city test for weeks while my kid goes down.
Right. Yep. So I think we're almost out of time. Let me just say that these things are just checklists for you to keep with you. This is really key. Okay. So before you leave, and again, I'll make sure that these are available. These two things are really big. So back to the 504, okay, and this who's in charge of monitoring things. Before you leave that meeting, okay, so they'll say, we're going to do this, and we're going to do this, and we're going to do this, and we're going to do this. Great. Everything happy, right? Then the next thing that you should say is, who's going to make sure that happens? Okay, how are we going to do it? So we're going to make accommodations for him so that he, in his classroom, he has fewer math problems per page. Great, I love that. That's a great accommodation for him. Who's going to monitor that? So is it going to be the para? Is it going to be the school psychologist? Is it going to be the teacher? Because those guys have good ideas too. They want it to work, but they all scatter and then they're like, oh, well, I thought you were doing it. Well, I thought you were doing it. Okay, make sure that you look at this checklist and that you ask at the end of your meeting, who? Okay, who's going to do this? Whose responsibility is that? Going back, it's like an action item in a well-run meeting. Okay, now let's go back. What are the things that we need to do and how are we going to do them? Okay, does that make sense? All right. I think we're out of time. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.